Welcome back to another episode of the XRP podcast. Today, we're going to be diving into what's going on with Clarity Act, how the banks continue to fight, and of course, we will dive into a lot that is happening around Kevin Warsh, the new Fed chair. All of that's going to be broken down. Of course, I'll have a special guest with me, Chris Giancarlo. You guys know him as Crypto Dad out there. That is the former CFTC chair that will be joining me here shortly. And getting into all of that, as I always ask of you guys, do one thing, make sure and like and subscribe here on the channel. It's one of the greatest things you can do for us as we continue to dive in, do a lot of research with our team on where the markets are heading. And obviously, regulation has been on the forefront. The key here, I think, that we are dealing with right now as clarity becomes, I think, maybe the number one topic around DC in terms of what the lawmakers are dealing with, what the lobbyists are dealing with, and of course, the administration. So this is going to be a very critical episode that hopefully will break down where we are today and possibly where we could be going. Because I think the biggest scenario that plays out for us in the next 6, 12, 18 months is all hinging on the factor of where clarity is heading. And of course, this will affect major assets. One of the biggest assets that will be affected, of course, I believe, are still going to be XRP, Ethereum, Solana, some of the bigger players out there that will have an immediate impact. And of course, we have seen and had here on the show a lot of ETFs that are continuing to drive into this, mainly because of the institutional capital interest. I think that's about to change also in Wall Street. So let's just break it all down. I want to thank our sponsor today, and that is Uphold, where you guys can earn crypto better. A lot of things happening with Uphold staking rewards. So you can stake up to 20 different cryptocurrencies and get into the reward side of things. New tokens, early access, along with full transparency. This is one of the best platforms out there to make trades on when it comes to crypto. The other thing you guys should be doing is this right here. Get the card, the XRP rewards card, which comes in the form of an Uphold debit card. And the nice thing about this, guys, is you can do this without a credit check. Also get up to 6% back on all your purchases for the first 3 months. You can get up to 10% back with a direct deposit stacked in on this. So this is one of the best values out there when it comes to a debit card where you can get into your digital assets. Make sure and check out Uphold. Use the link down below. Let them know we sent you. I want to bring in Chris Giancarlo coming in from, there he is. Nice to see you. How are you, man?
I'm really great, Paul. Great to be with you again. Great to be back.
Yeah, great to have you back. So we're going to get into, we had a chance to talk in the pre-show a little bit about what you're doing. You got to drop some more information about this book you're doing.
Yeah.
Give me some information on that first.
So my first book, Crypto Dad, The Fight for the Future of Money, was published back in 2021. It really was a narrative of my experience as commissioner and then as chairman of the CFTC. Mm-hmm. My next book is going to pick up where the first book left off. It's entitled Crypto Whisperer, The New Adventures of Crypto Dad. And it's going to pick up what we've been through, the 4 years of the Biden administration and its unannounced but quite official policy of hostility to financial network innovation, but really to focus on what's now the new broom in Washington, the new initiative of the administration, and what it means for not just crypto, but all the byproducts of crypto, whether they are stable coins or prediction markets or other areas that are coming out of this new architecture of finance.
Chris, when you look at the landscape right now, Trump 2.0, now kind of coined as the crypto president, we look at the amount of legislation that has come forth, obviously with the Genius Act getting through. We're going to talk a little bit about that because there's some things happening there. But if you look at the administration and the narrative, but also I think the agenda that they have put forth along with David Sachs, the crypto and AI czar, how close do you think they truly are to making this a realization in the crypto industry from a regulatory standpoint?
Let's put that in context. I find it very interesting. By the way, I think I was the first person to term President Trump the crypto president, not because of his work in Trump 2, but actually in his work in Trump 1.0, because the White House gave us leave at the CFTC to create a regulated market for Bitcoin futures,
Right.
which was the first federally regulated marketplace for any type of crypto. Quite frankly, it was one of the very first in the world, but not only that, the first in the United States. And that happened under President Trump. Could have easily been squelched by that administration, but it wasn't. So I actually termed him a crypto president. Now it's clear that he is with these efforts. But it's interesting that what David Sachs is doing is not just crypto czar, but AI czar, which I think actually is the giveaway to how this White House views crypto. They view it as part of an overall, every form of innovation forward strategy.
Right.
So it's crypto, it's AI, but it's also a drone technology, nanotechnology, biotechnology, quantum technology. They are trying to take the brakes off all of this American innovation. Why? Because the one thing America does better than anybody else is innovate. And why is innovation important? Because we and the rest of the developed world live under a mountain of debt. And the only way out of our debt is economic growth. And so the one thing you hear from this administration over and over again is 5+% economic growth. If we can get a sustained decade or more of 5% economic growth, we're going to grow through our debt.
Right.
And the way we're going to get that growth is through innovation. So I view crypto as part of an overall strategy of addressing our country's debt problems through innovation and taking the brakes off innovation, whether those brakes are put on by Washington regulators or whether they're put on by state impediments or monopolies. It's all about breaking through that so we can have sustained economic growth.
So, Chris, when you consider that, because this is one of the things we talk about and do a ton of research all the time on, and that is kind of the evolution of where crypto is heading. Because to your point, it is kind of all transacting into maybe a perfect storm where we will see the AI evolution. Crypto, of course, I just saw Elon, I think we had a story on that where he's essentially starting to deploy a lot more crypto analysts into the element of trying to teach Grok and some of their AI tools, XAI, how to not only trade it, but understand how to utilize it. So we'll see that most likely getting into the AI side a lot
And the
more.
news this morning that he's going to merge Grok into SpaceX.
Yep.
Isn't that interesting? Space technology is another area where the United States is leading. We're taking the brakes off. And when you empower that with artificial intelligence, the development cycle is getting faster and faster. You know, we used to think it would take decades to get to Mars, but with the help of AI, the ability to develop the type of rocket telemetry technology and other technologies necessary to do that type of building installations in our own solar system is accelerating faster and faster.
Well, and his thesis of moving data centers into space for obvious reasons, cooling, power, the capacity out there that we'll see within these satellites, and whether it's SpaceX or what we see even with the Starlink satellites going up with the infrastructure, and even the move here recently where he dropped the production on the Model X and the Model Y, and he's going to start building the Optimus robots.
Absolutely.
You know, so that's a huge, again, all of this.
It all comes together. I mean, there's a lot of very forward thinkers like this, people like Milton Demers and Fred Thiel at Mara that are thinking about the link between Bitcoin and energy. You know, storing molecules in crypto. You know, we have electric plants that generate power at a steady rate, and yet the load curve goes up and down depending on whether it's day or night. So you have this, and you can only store energy for so long in batteries. So rather than store it in batteries, convert it to crypto mining, turn it into Bitcoin, and then you can turn it back into energy when you need it. So the notion of energy production linked to Bitcoin mining is really an important way of actually creating a consistent set of mining, consistent set of digital networking for finance, and at the same time creating power supplies that are consistent. So it's really, all these technologies are linked. We can't treat them as single silos. We need a national policy and a national initiative toward an all of the above innovation strategy. You know, the United States, we do many things well. We do a lot of things not so good, but the one thing we do better than anybody is innovate. And when we take the brakes off, we can do that better than anybody. and
Well,
faster.
okay, so
More
let's talk about that, because taking the brakes off, that's where we are right now. You look at the current Digital Asset Market Clarity Act that is in DC, having a ton of pushback. I'll show you guys some tweets about the meeting yesterday, but a couple of the things that you have to point out is the bright line, I think, would say delineating the SEC and the CFTC jurisdictions. So that's going to be one that will happen. You obviously know better than most how that is going to play out. That if that were to happen, if we are, and I believe it will, and we get the CFTC for, whether we look at spot markets versus the security side, which obviously falls under the SEC, how big of a deal is that for innovation?
I think it's a big deal. I think it's a really big deal. And here's where I may have a sort of a heterodox view on this. I think it's a bigger deal for TradFi than it actually is for DeFi and than it is for digital innovation.
Say more.
Why do I say that?
Yeah.
The innovators in the digital network space have innovated straight through the last 4 horrible years of U.S. government hostility, if not outright suppression of this innovation, and they never quit. They were sued, they were attacked. They just moved offshore, but they didn't stop. They don't need the type of clarity that the big banks do. The traditional financial players, they've been investing tens of millions, but that's not going to do it. For them to really take advantage of this architecture, they need to invest the hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars. And they're never going to get it past their general counsels. They're going to say, oh, no. Without legislation, there's too much risk that a Gary Gensler comes back, that Elizabeth Warren becomes president, and the government's going to shut you down again. And so if you want to truly devote money to innovation, we need this legislation. I think the banks, in taking a posture of they don't need the legislation, are truly being short-sighted, because the innovation will continue. It'll just move offshore,
right?
And it eventually will be a threat to their banking franchises. They need to modernize. They need to. I tell this to people all the time, Paul. If your audience takes away one message from this conversation we're having right now, and one message only, it is crypto is much more than some funky new alternative asset class. Crypto is an entirely new architecture of finance. It's a digital network architecture that's going to change everything we know about banking and finance and money itself. It's as important to finance as the 15th century movement from handwritten printing to movable type printing. It allows everybody to access financial services in the way that movement to printing allowed anybody to access reading and writing and publication. And it's going to have a tremendous impact on society and everything, the way we interact, the way we conduct our financial affairs. Our American banks have to move with this. They can't resist this, and they need clarity. They need this act so that they can devote the kind of money to keep pace. The innovation's not going to stop if clarity doesn't get done. What will stop is traditional finance's ability to invest in it sufficiently to be successful.
So with that being said, you've got, because that I think gets to the point where we have this stablecoin standoff happening right now. And this obviously is all about yield-bearing stablecoins. The banks are coming in saying, we don't want this to be able to be paid. We still want to continue to sweep, deal with our profit margins based on the way that we operate and have been operating.
And those are sweet profit margins they got.
Exactly. You look at the statement, I'll show you a tweet right here that was out just on some of the talks that went into the White House yesterday. Again, this wasn't the leads, but during yesterday's White House meeting, banks reportedly refused to make any deal on stablecoin yields. Crypto reps left frustrated. Some banks were stalling, is what they're claiming. Bank lobbyist says no compromise, saying rules must support local lending and protect the safety and soundness of the financial system. Now, they are leaning on the smaller banks as kind of saving them. The reality is that most, now granted, it hasn't been TradFi that has started to exit banks. And do you think there really is a threat of flight of capital from banks into stablecoin?
Well, I'm pretty close to the space. I'm not aware of any dispositive economic analysis that says this is really going to hurt fractional banks and their deposits. The banks haven't pointed to any. This seems to be more of political positioning than actual economics going into this. And who's looking after the consumer? I mean, the consumer could certainly do with a bit more interest on their accounts. The banks are earning 4 or 5% on their Fed deposits, and they're paying 1 or 2%. So that's a nice little um, uh, 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 profit margin for banks. And what about the consumer on this? I was very disappointed to see who the banks sent to this meeting. There were no deal makers on the bank side.
Right.
Nobody that could cut a deal. Nobody that could do it. You had a lot of government relations people, but nobody who on the bank side that was really there to cut a deal. Now, the White House let it be known that that wasn't the purpose of the meeting. They didn't expect it. I think it was a stock taking of the different positions. And ultimately, I think the president will have to weigh in and help the banks to actually act in their own good. And I think their own good is to get a deal done and to get Clarity Act passed. But it may take the president of the United States to convince the banks that it's in their best interest to see this through.
Well, you've got Patrick Witt, which is the right hand to the president right now when it comes, I should say, to David Sachs, but he's leading the negotiations primarily between the lobbies, between the banking lobby and the crypto lobby. Sincere thanks to reps from the crypto and banking industries. This is where I'm getting kind of mixed signals coming out of DC. Over the course of the past few months, we've achieved a lot of breakthroughs, several seemingly intractable policy issues. He's confident that they're going to resolve this one. And this is all around stablecoin yield. You also have to consider the issue around private custody, self-custody. That's another thing that is starting to be thrown out in many of these amendments. Let's not even get into the idea of limiting the ability of programming and developers being held accountable. When you look at the DeFi side of things, do you think we are too far apart for the banks and the banking lobby to truly come to the table and make this a deal? Because we are almost at a point of no return come what, April or May? Is that about the deadline before we start going into midterms?
Yeah. Well, usually it's the 4th of July recess is usually the last possibility for a deal and the run up to that recess. So I think we do have time. As I say, I do think it's going to take the president. The president's been actually quite outspoken about the importance of this over the last few weeks. So he's starting to frame the issue. It's probably going to take calls from the president to some of the bank presidents. He's not on good terms with Jamie Dimon these days, which is unfortunate, but maybe that's part of the art of the deal.
Maybe so. Maybe
that threatened lawsuit somehow goes away. Look, I think the president's his presidency has a lot at stake in seeing this through. I'm optimistic, Paul. I've been saying really for months now, I still think this gets done. So each one of these issues, you actually gave a very good catalog a minute ago of the different issues, right? The so-called yield issue, the protagonists are traditional banks and the crypto trading platforms like Coinbase and Kraken and others. And then you've got the so-called ethics issue, which I find hilarious. That's the one where Congress is saying that somehow members of the executive branch, the president, can't trade crypto.
Right.
Now, that's, Congress, as we know, is the biggest insider trading cabal
stock
in the
traders
history of finance. And somehow they're going to tell another branch of government what they can and cannot do. Those without blame should cast the first stone. Maybe they should refrain themselves from insider trading before they ask another branch to refrain. And then, but the protagonists there are Republicans and Democrats. That's an entirely political issue that will get solved with some political compromise. And then you've got this, you mentioned it, the DeFi issue, the question of how far we can extend this horrible, and I'll be free to say it, this horrible 20th century analog AML KYC regime on this digital network 21st century technology. We've got to admit the emperor has no clothes. The AML KYC is a terrible regime. There was some congressman yesterday in a hearing who said it catches 87% of criminal activity. No, it captures less than 10%. And it costs an arm and a leg to do. It's got a false positive rate or over 98% for SARS filed. It's a terrible system. It's an ineffective system. That's not to say that we don't want to catch money laundering and illicit drug trafficking, et cetera. We do. But let's use a digital network system to do it, a 21st century, rather than this analog 20th century. It's like, designing a state-of-the-art automobile and putting a 19th century gas motor in it.
Right.
So we can do, but unfortunately, that seems to be what's taking place. They're wanting to impose a lot of these restrictions on wallet infrastructure and other parts of the DeFi infrastructure. Fortunately, I think developers are protected, but that's as far as it goes.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's state surveillance. Our AML KYC system is designed to stop criminal activity, but it actually operates like a surveillance system.
Yeah.
And as a democracy, one that where we citizens enjoy a Bill of Rights, and one of which is the Fourth Amendment right to privacy, the notion that government can surveil our financial transactions is something that it's time for reconsideration.
So there's been, well, one of the things I think you look at in terms of the innovation landslide that's going to be coming to the US, you could compare this to what Ripple was able to do in the EU just here recently, just I think this week, announcing that they have now new certificates for approval. This is pretty much going to open up the EU for them in terms of making both RLUSD, their stablecoin, and XRP. That'll be utilized in the infrastructure in Europe. Almost every bank over there will be able to hold that from a regulated standpoint. So they're already on their way. If we get this clarity, how big will that be to companies like Ripple, to the ecosystem of Ethereum, what's happening within Solana, even Bitcoin to a certain extent? How big do you think it will be for innovation?
So I think it's going to be big. I think clarity is really important, but it's important in kind of, again, a little heterodox in my view on this. If it doesn't get passed, American banking goes back to sleep, I think, for another generation in terms of digital architecture, while jurisdictions like Europe, with their MiCA legislation, will move forward. MiCA is not a great piece of legislation, but at least it makes it clear.
You got something.
Right, exactly, against nothing in the United States. So their banks will actually be able to get an advantage over American banks. American banks have been asleep on almost every innovation, right? When chips went into credit cards, we were still swiping them. In so many ways, when it comes to retail innovation, our banks just sit on that interest collection, the carry trade, and don't innovate. And it's only when popular demand, people come back from Europe and say, why am I still swiping when I'm using a chip over there? And I'm embarrassed that I don't have a chip in my card when I shop in Europe. That was years ago, but American banks will only innovate when forced to. I think we need clarity to force them. And once they no longer have the cover of a lack of legislation, they no longer have the cover to say there's too much regulatory risk, they will have to innovate. And then they will be adopting a digital network architecture, whether it's XRP. And we all have to tip our hat to XRP. That was, poster child for the Gensler-Warren attack on crypto, and they withstood it, and they stood up to it, and they're still standing and now persevering. So I tip my hat. There's also other L1s out there like the Canton Network, which is really developing very rapidly as a wholesale solution. I fully don't believe those who are maximalist and say the whole world's going to reduce down to Ethereum, the whole world's going to reduce down to XRP, the whole world's going to reduce down to Canton. I think the digital network future will be as complicated as the analog past.
Absolutely.
There will be multiple layer ones that will find a addressable market, and they will succeed. Now, I don't know if there'll be hundreds, but I think there may well be dozens that will find a path. Even in the analog past, when it came to credit cards, everything didn't go to MasterCard. You had Visa, you've got Discover, you've got American Express. They all found an addressable market, and I think the same thing is going to happen in the digital network future.
Chris, when you look at regulation that's already been put forth, the Genius Act, what we're finding now is some prosecutors that are starting to maybe enforce this a little bit more. I'll show you just some recent research that has been happening. And it was primarily around the idea of stablecoin issuers that weren't supposed to be able to freeze funds. Now we have found out that in reality, funds can be frozen. This is one of the things. Tether's frozen almost 3 billion since 23. Circle's sitting on about 114 million. All of this could be done through illicit fund. I mean, all the AML KYC component here that comes into it, but apparently it's actually legal. So the Genius Act was sold as more consumer protection, but it's actually legal to shield that. It lets issuers who profit from crime while victims get nothing, we're starting to see in this new section that there is the capacity to go into this in terms of freezing funds. When you look at this and where crypto was really meant to be, do you feel this is going to deter both companies, individuals, high net worth, family offices from jumping into crypto because of these elements that are being kind of baked into the regulatory alignment?
So glad you asked that question, Paul. I'm one of the co-founders of something called the Digital Dollar Project. And we founded that in the year 2020, realizing that the future of currency is going to be built upon digital networks. And that we believed that because that was a reality, we needed to focus on the dollar. And we needed to focus on how do we future-proof the dollar for this digital network future? How do we ensure the dollar remains the world's reserve currency? And most importantly, how do we make sure a digital dollar, whether that's sovereign issued or commercially issued, preserves the rights of a free society, rights to privacy, rights to financial transactions, provided they're lawful, that are private and secure and certain. And at the time as we've been writing this, we've always never advocated a U.S. central bank digital currency, but we've always had an open mind. We've said what best ensures privacy. And we were free to admit that, unfortunately, there's nothing in stablecoins that protect privacy, nor is there any First Amendment or a Fourth Amendment protection. And we've said that the one virtue a U.S. central bank digital currency would have would be under our Fourth Amendment. The government couldn't mine that data the way a stablecoin company can mine a data. Now, the jurisprudence is not perfect on this. I'm not saying it would, but at least you'd have an argument that a sovereign issued, a government issued, subject to the U.S. Constitution issued digital currency, you'd have rights of privacy when you have no privacy rights in stablecoin. And when the Genius Bill came up, and I applaud Senator Bill Hagerty and the Congress for passing it, but I bemoan the fact that the word privacy doesn't appear in the bill.
Yeah.
In the act, there is nothing in stablecoin legislation that gives you a right to privacy. And stablecoin operators, once interest rates go down, will be actively mining that data for an additional revenue stream. So, and I was pillared by some people on the right side of the aisle saying, you're speaking heresy here. We all know that a CBDC is dangerous for privacy, as if somehow stablecoins are good for privacy. Well, the fact of the matter is, as you just read, it's quite clear that our stablecoin legislation allows our government to demand surveillance, allows our government to demand controls over that. And so while I think we've advanced forward in modernizing the dollar, and I do think the right thing from a technical point of view is to allow the private sector to do the innovation. They will always do that better than the public sector. I think anybody, especially people that claim to be civil libertarians, have to be highly disappointed in what you've just pointed out.
Yeah.
Now, I'm all in favor of law enforcement. In Enlightenment democracies like the United States, we've been balancing a right to privacy with law enforcement since Magna Carta. The notion that a person's house is their castle goes back at least to the 13th century, but it always was balanced with law enforcement, right? You have a right to take care of your private business behind your front door, except if law enforcement has probable cause to believe you're breaking the law, in which they have the right to break down your door. So we've never said there's an absolute right to privacy, but in order to invade privacy, government needs probable cause and a warrant. And unfortunately, where finance has gone since the passage of the Bank Secrecy Act and since 9/11 in the United States is government no longer needs a warrant. Government is surveilling our financial activity, gathering information without a warrant, not because they have probable cause that we've done something wrong, but because they want to be there in case we've done something wrong, which is not what was intended in our original rights of free men and women.
Well, yeah, you almost get into pre-crime,
Yeah,
which,
pre-crime.
which is
Surveillance
where you're going to
people
have
done.
AI integrating more and more into that, saying that this is a subject that might end up doing something wrong in the future. Might, keyword.
And we used to have a divide for citizens and non-citizens, that for
Yeah.
non-citizens, government could gather information, but for citizens, the notion of a warrant. But unfortunately, that is so eroded right now. And as you just read, government is not only surveilling, government is now telling stablecoin companies when to seize and when to
Yep.
stop transactions, which is not the ethos of the digital asset, what I call the Internet of Value.
Chris, will this push more and more people offshore? Do we see privacy coins becoming much more popular? Because I think a lot of people don't even know privacy coins exist. They wouldn't know what Zcash is from, Tesla.
Right.
If people start to discover that these privacy coins are actually a different mechanism, do you feel that we will see a lot of the libertarians, or maybe even just everyday Americans, starting to go this direction?
I think it's a great question, Paul. Unfortunately, the biggest draw will be people that have something illegitimate to hide.
For sure.
Right. And we do need more rank and file people. I think we've got to get back to a society that values privacy for privacy's sake. I mean, I hear too many politicians and public figures saying, well, if you want to do things private, you must have something to hide. No,
Yeah.
we all have a right to privacy.
Yeah.
For whatever reason. And if we're doing something illegal, that's different. But if I don't, what I buy my wife for her birthday is my business and my business alone. I mean, government should not have the right to surveil activity simply because they want to know what we're up to.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, and I think the key here will be, if once we see this go through, and I think a lot of this will play out over the next 5 years in terms of lawsuits, all sorts of things becoming, very public, especially with social media. We could see maybe some movement here that I think would move in that direction. But the cool thing is that I think the industry will open up to the whole idea of where privacy, and we may even see some layer ones really starting to go this direction.
Well, I hope you're right. I must say I'm on this. I'm usually very optimistic. I'm a glass full all the time view, but we're a generation that has become immune to surveillance. We make a big deal of government surveillance, and yet we give all our data away to Facebook and to YouTube and Amazon, and we don't get too worked up over it. And it's a shame. I think it's an erosion of the democratic ethos of every person as a free, fully articulated and autonomous individual, and we're too at peace with group surveillance, and I think that doesn't bode well for democracy in the long run.
Yeah, for sure. Gosh, we could go forever on that one, but I do want to talk about Kevin Warsh.
Yeah,
because this is a new era. Some people would say that it's a hawkish era that we have just entered. I want your opinion. When you look at kind of the Warsh paradox, so to speak, the pro crypto side he's talked about before, but at the same time, he is also on the monetary side somewhat hawkish, or at least has been in the past.
Yeah.
Do you think this translates into his future decisions?
Yeah. So I had the pleasure of working with Kevin Warsh over the years, especially on a paper put forward by the Hoover Institute in 2022 on digital currency. And maybe we can put the site to that up in your chat for listeners. I think they might find it interesting.
It up, yeah.
It'll reflect a lot of thinking. It's 4 years old, but I think actually still quite relevant today. And I found working with Kevin to be a great pleasure. Actually, I'll come back to digital currency in a second, because I want to actually say that I really support his hawkish views on dollar strength and curbing the debasement of the dollar that's been taking place. I think the greatest threat to the United States' our American way of life and our economy and our savings is the continued debasement of the dollar. If Kevin Warsh stands for one thing and one thing only, and that is to stop some of the money printing, that will be all by itself probably the hugest accomplishment can be done. And so I'm very supportive of him in that regard. If you read the paper that I just cited by Hoover Institute, if you read Kevin Warsh's, I also think it was 2022 op-ed in the Wall Street Journal, he's very pro moving the dollar from an analog instrument to a digital networked instrument. Again, I think very positive for the future of the dollar. He's open-minded as to the role of sovereign and private sector issuance. He believes that there's a role for both the sovereign and the private sector issuance. And I don't think he's wrong on that. Look, I think the most important thing Congress can do with regard to the dollar is declare the dollar an asset owned by the United States. Like any good trademark, think of a trademark like McDonald's or Nike, they're known around the world. But the most well-known trademark around the world is the dollar. And yet we, the United States, have never said it's ours and ours only. And if you want to license it, here are the terms that go with that licensure.
Interesting.
So if you're Circle, if you're Paxos, if you're Tether, if you're anybody, if you want to create a digital dollar, there's a 120-page set of T's and C's that go with that.
Yeah.
And one of those T's and C's is the privacy of users. That's the real failure we haven't done as a nation. We are actually today allowing France to license dollar-based stablecoins.
Mm-hmm.
France is going to set the rules. Can you believe that?
That's
for a
great.
dollar instrument. Singapore is licensing dollar-based stablecoins. Singapore is setting the rules. No. That's the mistake. Where the genius bill went wrong is it should have said, here are the terms and conditions if you want to license the dollar as a reference entity for your stablecoin. And one of those should be privacy. If we got that right, then it actually almost doesn't matter if the issuer is a sovereign or a corporate, because they would have the same protections of privacy. Now, there's a difference between a corporate issuer, Tether, Circle, Paxos, PayPal, or a sovereign. The difference is a sovereign gives the full faith and credit. The sovereign stands behind that. With a stablecoin, it's a corporate obligation. Now, it may be 100% backed by treasury securities, but if the promoters abscond with those treasury securities, your stablecoin is worthless. I'm not saying that's going to happen, but in the hierarchy of money, when there's a run on the bank, there's a reason people go to the ATM. And while they go to the ATM to take possession, what they're really doing is converting a bank liability into a sovereign liability. They want cash because Uncle Sam's imprint is on it. And in the hierarchy of money, sovereign instruments are always a higher priority than corporate instruments. And so I can envision a world where you can have sovereign digital money alongside corporate digital money, and corporate digital money will have the cooler apps. It will have all kinds of distribution capability, but you still have sovereign money backing it. And let me give you another case why, and as Kevin Warsh points out in his Wall Street Journal article, a wholesale, so-called wholesale digital makes sense. In a digital network future, where you've got, let's say, 20 different stablecoins from a Tether to a Circle to a one issued by Target stores or Sam's Club, even if they have the exact same holdings of treasury securities, they're going to have different convertibility. One may be convertible on 24 hours, one may be 3 days, or redemption is what I meant to say. They may have limited convertibility into other stablecoins. Some may come with only cool apps that only work on that one stablecoin, don't work on other, calculators or interest assessment things. They may have different liquidity. Tether's got enormous liquidity.
Right.
The Sam's Club digital dollar may have very little liquidity. And so all these differences will get worked out in a marketplace. What will develop, I expect, will be foreign exchange-like markets for dollar-based stablecoins, where little shavings of a penny will be a difference, but the market will work them out. Well, once that happens, what becomes your reference entity? Are they referenced down to treasuries, or are they referenced to the dollar itself? And what is the dollar if you don't have a wholesale digital dollar? So I think what I'm saying about Kevin Warsh is, unlike these, I think, fairly narrow and shallow debates that say CBDC bad, stablecoins good for privacy, which really haven't gone beyond looking at the fact that the Genius Act provides no privacy for stablecoins. The real debate is not one bad, one good. The real debate is the future is going to be all of the above. We're going to be dealing with CBDCs whether we like it or not, because Europe's going to have one, China's going to have one, even the United States doesn't have one. Canada's likely to have one. They will be there, and we're going to be dealing with them. We're going to have them in our wallets, because when we go to Europe, you're going to have to pay for your visa with it. You're going to have to pay for different things. We're going to have digital euros in our wallet. So CBDCs are coming whether like it or not. The real question is the values. If we get the values right, if anything that references the dollar is built on the values of a democratic society, a right to privacy, a right to autonomy, balanced with proper law enforcement, then it almost doesn't matter whether you've got both sovereign and non-sovereign instruments trading by side, which is, I think, what's most likely to happen over the next several decades.
All right. So that's an interesting concept in the sense of a dual system that could live out there. Obviously, most of these, I'm assuming all of these would either be backed by treasuries or some other tier one asset, maybe gold. Don't know.
Maybe Bitcoin.
Maybe Bitcoin. If you look at the current strategy that Bessent and Trump have in play, and listen, kind of hear me out on this, because you look at the banks right now pushing back on stablecoin yield. Obviously, stablecoins are really kind of the next best buyer for treasuries. Every time we mint a stablecoin, a treasury is being purchased. That, of course, takes some of the pressure off the U.S. to sell treasuries to sovereign nations like China,
right,
Japan, and so on, where we've already started to see that unwind.
Yep.
And the likelihood with Trump's new strategy of becoming more hemispherical in terms of nature, if you look at the Monroe Doctrine, is almost lining up with what he's trying to do.
Yep.
If we're doing all of that, wouldn't the president and Bessent be simply saying, listen, don't screw up the stablecoin deal, because this is the plan for the U.S. dollar to be stabilized through our treasury by exporting these stablecoins all around the world, in essence, to your point, almost licensing them now across to all third world countries, emerging countries.
100%.
Okay.
Stablecoins have gone from a means to speculate in crypto. They were the entry point to get into crypto speculation, to be going more broadly to becoming the carnival ticket to go into the metaverse and not just speculate, but buy NFTs, others. Then they evolved to becoming replacement currencies for failed national currencies in failed states in this hemisphere and other places around the globe, to evolving beyond that to becoming actually a good form of faster, more efficient, lower cost money transfer around the globe for all kinds of wholesale uses, to ultimately where I believe they're going to go, to becoming actually the instrument for internet commerce in the future, and AI transactions, all kinds of transactions for agentic AI transactions.
Yeah.
We're going to program our money to take the day-to-day need to transfer money out of the equation and make it automatic. I'm just going to walk into Starbucks and walk out with a coffee, and the payment will be taken care of. I'm going to read an article. You just posted an article. I'm going to read it, and the royalties will be paid directly in micropayments by word that my eye will read. So stablecoins are they're huge. They're the future of payments. And the fact that the dollar is going to be the reference entity for that future is a tremendous advantage to the United States. It's about selling treasuries, which I think was one of the driving factor, probably the driving factor in the stablecoin bill. But it's going to become much more than that. It's going to make the dollar the reference entity of the agentic AI payment future.
Yeah.
Then the question becomes, ultimately, what is the dollar? What is that actual reference entity? Because I think you're actually going to find that the different networks are going to trade at different discounts and premiums. And we're going to ultimately need this is the one that the U.S. government stands behind.
Well, and I'm showing the article here, Elon XAI starting to hire crypto experts for AI trading. Back to your point is that, and this is something we talk about on the channels a lot, is that the evolution of agentic AI, micropayments, and eventually all payments will be engineered and orchestrated through most of the AI structure, especially as we get into trading elements, which will be the first kind of low-hanging fruit, to your point. But I guess the point I'm getting at here, when you look at the whole issue of where Xi Jinping, he put out a statement, hey, the digital yuan is happy to be the reserve currency of the world. I just don't understand why Trump is not putting more pressure on the banks to get this done.
I think he will. So I think there's been a little rope to dope going on right now.
Okay.
I think calling him to the White House was the first step. I think the pressure is going to ramp up. I think there was, to my mind, there was a little bit of disrespect shown by the banks, by the relatively non-negotiation posture, the unwillingness to send real deal makers to a White House that focuses on deal makers. And a White House is going to recognize that for what it was, which is they weren't ready to deal. And I think the time will come. Now, I hope, I obviously, I don't want to assume with the White House, but knowing this White House, I don't think they're going to tolerate for very long an unwillingness to engage in something that they view as essential to winning the midterms.
Yep, for sure. Okay, so last thing I want to hit on here, because I don't know if I got an answer on what is Warsh good for risk assets. If you look at a Fed chair who loves Bitcoin and digital assets, but is over here on the monetary side saying, well, we're not really going to work with QE. We're going to shrink our balance sheet. How does that play into, because it's kind of a juxtaposition.
You're right. I mean, shrinking the balance sheet and lowering interest is, those are themselves hard to do severally. Doing them at the same time is challenging.
Yeah.
He's got a big task. I mean, look, I like Jay Powell a lot. We were colleagues when I served in government. We worked very closely together. He's also a great guitar player, by the way, and I'm a guitar player. We had
know that.
Oh yeah, we had some fun jam sessions. Wow. And Jay's a fine public servant. Having said that, the Fed has totally missed the curve over the last 5 years.
Yeah.
Again and again and again. This is not a period in the history of the Fed we're going to look back with as a crowning success. So I think Warsh comes in with a great deal of expectations. I think great opportunity to get ahead of the curve. I think he is sympathetic to what the president's trying to do. Look, many of your listeners are going to have many views of Donald Trump as president of the United States, good and bad. And every president deserves a critical judgment by the American citizenry, and everybody has a right to score him good and bad. The fact of the matter is, he's the first president in at least 2 decades that is saying we have a major debt problem, and the only way out is through growth.
Yep.
And you may not like his message, you may not like his approach, but if we can get to consistent 5% economic growth, we're finally going to turn around the debt we're piling on our kids and grandkids and start taking responsibility for it and doing something about it. And if he's appointing people like Scott Bessent, who's, I think, I've watched many Treasury secretaries. I work very closely with Steve Mnuchin. I work with Janet Yellen. Scott Bessent is one of the best Treasury secretaries we've had. The man is solid and sound and clear thinking and knows what he's doing. Kevin Warsh at the Fed, I think, is going to be very good for the role of the Federal Reserve. And then regulators like Paul Atkins and my protege, Mike Seelig at the CFTC, my good friend Paul Atkins, the SEC, people like, we've got a Gould at the FDIC and others. This is a first-class team of financial regulators and bank regulators. And I think we're poised for a number of years of very solid growth. And I think if we don't screw it up, this is going to be a very bright future, or at least a turnaround from the direction we've been heading.
Chris Giancarlo coming in, of course, from New York. Thank you so much. Make sure and check out his new book, The Crypto Whisperer, coming to shelves near you soon. I can't wait to pick that one up. I'm intrigued at what you're going to be talking about in there. So
it's going to be out in October next year, just in time for the holidays. And I'm really excited for everybody to read it.
I love it. Thank you so much for coming in today, Chris. We appreciate it.
Great to see you, Paul. Thank you. We'll see you.
All right.
We'll do it again.
You bet. All right, you guys know what to do. One of the things, of course, we always ask you guys to do is make sure and give us some feedback, what you think we should be talking about and who are the deal makers that we should be bringing here on the show. Drop it in the comments down below. We'll catch you later right here on the XRP podcast. Take care.